The South Carolina Hall of Fame was founded in Myrtle Beach in 1973 to recognize and honor contemporary and past citizens who have made outstanding contributions to South Carolina's heritage, history, and progress.
Jimmy Byrnes was one of the best-known South Carolina political figures of the 20th century.
Born on May 2, 1882, only months after his father's death, Byrnes grew up near a local orphanage in Charleston.
His mother went to New York and became a seamstress, and that was how she supported the family. And one of the reasons that he stopped school at the age of 14.
He left St. Patrick's Catholic School to become an office boy at a Charleston law firm, where he was educated in law by one of the senior partners, Judge Benjamin Rutledge. Several years later, Judge Rutledge told him about an open position as a court reporter with Judge James Aldridge in Aiken County.
He's getting sort of a real-world case study of the law as he is taking all this information down. And that was the beginning of his political career.
In 1908, Byrnes decided to put his knowledge of law to the test, taking and passing the bar exam and opening his own law practice. He soon became a state attorney and established himself as one of South Carolina's best-known solicitors. Then, in 1911, Byrnes ran and was elected to Congress as a Democratic representative from South Carolina.
Byrnes made sure that South Carolina got its fair share or more of federal assistance. He helped get federal funding for highways in South Carolina. He promoted that to help particularly the farmers of the state as well as the businessmen.
In 1925, Byrnes chose to run for United States Senate against Coleman Blease. Unfortunately for Byrnes, the Ku Klux Klan were avid supporters of Blease, especially after Byrnes declined their secret offer to become a Klan member.
Byrnes had two strikes against him. One, he didn't support the Klan, and two, he had been reared Catholic.
There was a lot of anti-Catholic feelings in the South at that time, maybe throughout the country.
Byrnes had been raised Catholic but became Episcopalian when he met and married his wife, Maud Bush. In a successful attempt to sabotage Byrnes' senatorial campaign, the Klan created an ad in which altar boys from St. Patrick's Catholic School endorsed Byrnes for senator.
At first glance, you might think that this was a Byrnes ad, talking about what a religious young man he had been, but it was to get the message across that Byrnes was a Catholic.
After his loss, Byrnes moved back to Spartanburg to continue practicing law, but it wasn't long before he was encouraged to run for Senate again. This time, he won. During his time in the Senate, Byrnes was appointed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt to be the spokesperson for New Deal legislation.
Over the years, they developed a great relationship. Roosevelt felt that he could trust him without question.
Byrnes became one of Roosevelt's closest advisors and was eventually appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Serving on the Supreme Court was an honor, but there were not really any major decisions that took place while Byrnes was on the court.
Luckily for Byrnes, the U.S. involvement in World War II meant that Roosevelt needed him in Washington.
In that position, he became Director of Economic Stabilization first, and then Director of War Mobilization.
War mobilization, that's mobilizing the entire economy and manufacturing to fight the war. An incredible job.
Byrnes' influence was seen throughout the war effort, and his advice was so often sought by President Roosevelt that Byrnes was referred to as the assistant president.
He was helping to run the country, and it was the press that called him the assistant president, which led people to think, well, he'll be Roosevelt's nominee for vice president in 1944. Didn't happen.
Instead, the nomination went to Harry S. Truman.
When Roosevelt died, Truman became president. And one of the first calls he made was to Byrnes. And right after that was when President Truman asked him to become Secretary of State.
Byrnes began taking more matters into his own hands, straining his relationship with President Truman. In 1947, he resigned from his position as Secretary of State and returned to South Carolina.
He came back home and was elected governor of South Carolina.
As governor, Byrnes worked to increase funding for African American schools, feeling it was an important aspect of the state's separate but equal policies.
He asked the legislature for $128 million for the school, for education, and 2/3 of that was to go to the black schools.
2 years before becoming governor, Byrnes and his wife established the James F. Byrnes Foundation, which provided scholarships for students who had lost one or both of their parents.
He felt, after spending years in public service, that this was the most important thing he'd ever done.
Byrnes died on April 9, 1972, and was buried at Trinity Episcopal Church in Columbia.
He is almost the perfect American success story. Young boy, rural South Carolina, raised by a single mother who ends up being a U.S. Senator, Supreme Court judge, Secretary of State, and Governor of South Carolina.
His legacy as a self-educated, influential politician, as well as his work as a humanitarian, makes him one of South Carolina's most well-known statesmen.